Welcome everyone to the second Town Hall Talks. Now, this has been marketed as a talk about weaving, which will then lead into the boot and shoe industry, but I'm afraid to say, as always, I have got too carried away, so it will only be focusing on the weaving and the wool stuff. So, because the boot and shoe industry is a whole other subject that will take another talk, so there's going to be another talk. Yes. So this is Maureen, who will be my partner today because she knows more about this stuff than I do. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background first of all, and then we're going to do some practical stuff, which will make for a nice change. So anyone who was here for the last talk on the crannogs, we were talking about the archaeological finds that were found while they were doing the excavation in the late Victorian period. And one of the things they found was this here, which is a spindle whorl. Now that would have been attached to basically a stick, and it was an early version of spinning. So you might have seen that as you come in, we have drop spindles here. The way they worked, it was that way up, and I think I was talking to you about it the other day. There would also be a little dish that would go along with this, so they would sit down and they would spin this in the dish and spin the wool, and then stop and spin it onto the length of stick there. And then you get the drop spindle, but we'll talk about that later on. So, here's some information from the old statistical account of 1792 of Maybole. And what that says is that woolen manufacture carried out in Maybole to a greater extent than was commonly known.
Find a pew.
Come in. Yes, sorry about that. So the woolen manufacture was carried out in Maybole to a greater extent than people were commonly aware of. There were 80 looms employed in the town and the county parish, and they employed 300 people over the course of the manufacture, and they annually produced 5,600 tonnes of wool, and the goods were sold at 4 markets, 4 in Ayrshire and 4 in Maybole. What did you say they were called?
Quarter days, quarter markets.
Quarter markets. But in 1792, within the year of this statistical account being written, there were 24 looms employed in the cotton manufacture because they realised that cotton was another material that would be quite good to use as well as wool. Now, there's a sort of postscript written in the statistical account here. So it's talking about how wonderful the weaving industry is in Maybole and how many people were employed in it. But things can change very rapidly, and they did in 1792. So I think it was a minister who wrote this chapter, and he says, "Since writing the above, a striking proof of the fluctuating nature of manufacturers has been afforded. The supply of webs from Glasgow has been greatly curtailed and prices lowered. Many of the weavers have been thrown idle and reduced to the state of starvation. What they call a dull has set in, and the heritors and inhabitants of the parish have had to come forward for their relief." The statement in the subsequent paragraph referred to the state of things 2 or 3 months ago, so that just shows you how dire it got. And from that point, the people in Maybole had to diversify, and that's what led into the boot and shoe industry. But that is for another day. So, we are going to do some practical stuff. So, we're talking about wool and weaving. And instead of me standing talking at you this afternoon, I thought it would be best to demonstrate the process of how you deal with a fleece. So that's what we're going to do. So this chap here, this is a Shetland sheep, and I purchased an entire sheep fleece from Orkney, and it was a Shetland fleece, so I got very confused about what I was actually working with. But the breed is Shetland, from Orkney, and it cost me £14 on eBay, and I did not know what on earth I was letting myself in for. It came almost vacuum packed, like a duvet cover, and I opened it and I almost passed out with the smell. It's not an unpleasant smell, it's just a very, very, very heavy smell. And if you want to experience that for yourself, then I shall pass this round and you can have a sniff at this. So this is one small part of the fleece, and the fleece is huge. It filled 2 bin bags, basically. So this is a small part of it. It's not been treated. It's still got its lanolin. Yeah, it's still lanolin attached to it, so it's quite oily. I will pass it round. Could you pass that back to...
Can I just say that if you've got breaks in your skin, perhaps it's best not to touch it?
Yes, and if you're allergic to
Lanolin, don't
fluffy
touch
animals, don't... Yeah. So that's raw fleece. That's what you have to start with. And the first part of the process is a process called scouring, and that is to remove plant matter and the lanolin oil from the fleece in order for the next stage to happen. So what I did was I steeped the fleece, or some of the fleece, in cold water overnight, and that draws out quite a lot of the dirt and some of the oil. Then you have to use a detergent after that to break down some of the lanolin oil to take it out of the fleece. Some people like to keep a lot of it in, isn't that right, Maureen?
Yes, if the more lanolin that is left in, the more waterproof the final product will be. So for those who would be spinning for outer garments, fishermen's garments, for example, they would leave a fair amount of the lanolin in. There are folk who just prefer to spin in the raw. It makes a wee bit of a messier spinning wheel, in fairness, but that's sort of what they do. It's horses for courses.
Yeah. So I didn't want to work with oily stuff, so I tried to get as much of the lanolin removed as possible. So after steeping it overnight in cold water, I then put it into hot water with some detergent. It was natural wool detergent that you would use in your washing machine, actually. It's designed to clean wool, but it was just enough detergent to take the oil off. And I think I did that twice, and then you have to rinse the wool. So every time you finish, you have to squeeze and be very careful not to agitate the wool, because when it's wet, and if you do that, it will start to felt. If you wanted a nice sheepskin rug, you could use the whole fleece and rub it very hard, and you'll end up with a nice wee rug. But I didn't want to do that. So after that, you then need to dry it. And Maureen had a little folder that shows you whoever it was that was drying the wool was using it on an oven, was it? An agar or
I created a folder, which of course I couldn't find tonight, could I? Such as that's normal, something you can't find. Where, having got to that stage, I just dried it. We have an agar, so I dried it on top of the lids of the agar, as you do. The thing is to get it properly dry.
Yes.
And once it's properly dry, then you can prepare it for spinning. You can see how many steps already we are into this process. And each step takes time. And can I hold that in your mind, that we're talking here about a slow process?
Definitely. So to dry mine, I actually bought a herb dryer from Amazon, which is basically like a big net, essentially, to stop the birds stealing it for their nests and to stop it blowing away. So I sat it out there on a nice day and let it dry. And then we end up with this, which is treated fleece. Now it's ready for... So now it's ready for the next process, and I shall pass that round. So that's washed, and if you smell that, it's not got that heavy smell coming from it anymore, because most of the lanolin has been removed.
When we've finished talking, when you come up to the front, you'll see that we've got 3 other fleece here, pieces of fleece. When a fleece gets to this stage, it's called a roving. And I bought these quite a number of years ago. So I actually can't remember the sheep, what kind of sheep it is. But they feel different to the Shetland. Perhaps with the exception of this one, which I have a feeling is Shetland, but I couldn't swear to it. Different sheep produce fleece that's different. So for example, in the Low Countries back in the day, what is now Holland, they really couldn't grow sheep. They didn't have the land for it. But England did. And so England would have all these sheep, and then they would shear them, and they would ship it all over to Holland to be woven, spun and woven. And that's why the Chancellor of the Exchequer in England to this day sits on a wool sack in the House of Lords, because wool was the source of their wealth. These are all processes that take time, and as we became more skilled, I suppose, it began to go to people who did it better. And the continental weavers were very good at really fancy weaving. Arguably, the Scottish weavers were more about everyday weaving. But they were still very good.
Yes, yes. So, now that we have the washed and dried fleece is ready for yet another stage. So, you'll have seen these before, or you've certainly heard the name. They're carding brushes, or if you're Scottish, they're cairder's brushes. And if you're from Maybole, you'll know that there's a burn called the cairder's burn. And we had this conversation before, because I've learned about all the different processes about it, I couldn't work out what the water part was for or why it was called the cairder's burn. But you said it was possibly because two processes were combined together. Mm-hmm. So they'd be using the water to wash and card at the same time, which I'm not going to attempt to do.
It's easier with dry, it is.
Yes,
but bear
definitely.
in mind that the predecessors of those were heckles,
Yes.
which were basically big nails on a bit of wood. And you would attach that to a stump of a tree or something, and you would take your chunk of this and basically throw it over the heckles and pull. Like that.
That's me ringing now.
Is that you? It's not me. No, it's not me. I think how physical that is. That effort. And generally speaking, we are at this point mainly talking about the women doing it. Must have been strong women. Your turn.
My turn. So the carding process is to make sure that all of the, what's the word?
All the staple.
All the staple.
Which means the hair.
In the same direction.
The bits of hair, the length of the hair. But they all run in the same way. Otherwise you can't draw it. When it's been carded, and it's like this, you can see what Philip is doing here. She's drawing and spinning on a wheel. And what she's doing is she's taking the carded wool and very gently pulling it apart. You can see how it starts to move. Because what you want is something that looks a bit like Santa's beard. So it's all nice and even, and it will spin up beautifully even, and Philip is a very good spinner, much better than I am. But that's the line. I think you can probably see through that, how the lines are running, they're running together, all in the same direction. And that's what gives you the strength to the thread, to the yarn. Because each of those then spins round itself, spins round its pals, and instead of being falls apart, it becomes tight because of that twist.
So I've loaded this carding brush here with some of the wool, and I'm going to demonstrate, hopefully, the correct way to do this. So you do it sitting down, the left hand paddle needs to be on your knee, and you hold the right hand one like this. And I don't know what the process is for left-handed, whether it's the other way around, although in those days you were battered if you were left-handed and forced to use the right hand. So what we want to do here is, there's some of it's hanging over the edge, and if the cleaning process hasn't quite been finished at this point, you just catch the ends like that, and that should knock any of the remaining dirt or whatever onto the floor. And then you start at the front and basically just pull the two brushes together like that, not pressing down too hard on it, because if you do that, they will get stuck. And then you just very slowly and gently working your way up to the top. And you'll notice that when I come back, you have to flex the front up like that, because if you go like that, you're going to fold it in itself and make a horrible mess. So you just keep going like that. Now, I usually do this twice with this, but you don't necessarily need to, do you?
You do it till you're happy with it.
I'm never happy with it.
As with many things, with practice, a spinner would become used to what they needed and what they wanted to work with. And therefore it became a degree of personal choice. Some people were hired to spin because they spun very fine, lace weight. Others, slightly more robust, shall we say. So that was a different story. It was a different skill set. But when Simon was talking about the whole spinning and as he gets on with that, and your drop spindles. If you look at medieval pictures, medieval manuscripts, you will see women with a sort of stick with something on the top of it. It looks a bit like a giant Q-tip for your ear. And this is called a distaff. There's a stick with that lovely stuff on it, up here. And on the other hand, she would have something that looked vaguely like this, a drop spindle. Because although it could be done sitting down, in the earlier days, it was done walking about. Everywhere you went, you spun. Think how long it takes to make just a yard of yarn. So you're constantly at it. You were constantly doing it. Walking about, talking to your friends, going to the market, watching the children, whatever, you were spinning. And having the roving on the distaff meant you had your other hand free. And that went on for a considerable time, until about early Middle Ages, slightly later, when you begin to see wheels coming in. Now they allow you to do more. It allowed folk to sit down to do more. But it also meant the women weren't as free to move about. I'll leave that one with you for what it's worth. But what? This spins.
I'm about to demonstrate, hopefully.
That spun. It dangled. Well, in this case, it would dangle that direction. And it spun, like a spinning top thing, but with a bit attached to it. And it spins round. Gravity helps you. But then the spinning wheel comes in where you can do more, do faster, but you can't move about so much. Spinning wheels have remained much like that from then till now. Okay, you see the kind, this Sleeping Beauty kind with the pointy bit. They're flax wheels. Flax needed a distaff. It couldn't be held in your hand, as you can see Philippa doing just now. It needed a distaff. It needed a thing up here. And it also needed a wee dish of water, because flax must be kept damp when you're doing that. Germany was the big place for flax. So a lot of the wheels like that are German wheels. Sleeping Beauty is a German fairy tale. Mm-hmm. So Germany is making the flax. Germany is weaving linen, not wool so much. Wool is more of a Northern European thing. Are you ready for it? Oh, yes. Good. Here he is. He's ready.
So we have carded the wool, all the, what's the word? Staple is in the right direction. And I'm going to attempt to do this drop spinning. I only successfully did it to my satisfaction an hour ago, so we'll see how we get on. So I've attached a lead thread to this, because you can't just attach this to there because it'll just fall to bits. And the idea with this is, Maureen's saying about the ladies that can walk around and do it and do other stuff. I can't do that, so I use the spin and park method. So there we go, spin it, and then stop, park it. And then what I'm wanting to do is transfer that twist up here, hopefully. We shall see what happens.
It's a pinch and a draw, and then you let the pinch go, and the spin works its way up. That's the theory.
That's the theory. It's not working.
You can watch it on Philippa.
This is the same principle.
Same principle, but a step further forward. Now, youngsters would be learning this at 3 and 4. As soon as they could manage the coordination, they started to learn. So we are about 2.5 at this stage.
I find it's quite hard to get this bit started, but you can see it's starting to happen. Maureen pointed out that my first attempt at this, I was trying to pull the staples here, but what I'm trying to do there is to pull the staples actually apart. This has got quite a long staple, doesn't it? So you have to pull it much further apart for it to work.
It's got the same feeling as, I don't know if you've ever bent a bit of lead. It's got that same sort of feeling to it. But you gain it with practice. You get the feel, and it starts to pull apart quite nicely without totally pulling apart. Although it does that too.
I haven't been doing this very long, so I need to practice. But I'm getting there. I want a spinning wheel, actually. Yes. So you can see it sort of coming together. So when it gets to this point, I want to wind it onto the, what's this bit called?
Stick?
The stick. This one. I thought they would have proper names.
Not to the best of my knowledge. Often, as in the Crannog site, these bits were found because they would be made, often made of stone, made of pottery. They would be made as gifts, as engagement gifts, wedding gifts. You know, a bit like giving somebody a set of pots and pans. You know, you give your beloved meant she had a way of earning her living. And that's the original meaning of the word spinster. A spinster was a woman, generally a woman, who was so good at weaving and spinning, she could earn her own living. Scary. But not all spindles look the same. This is the kind of standard European spindle. This is also a spindle. It's also a drop spindle. It's called the Gelgang. It's a Scottish drop spindle. And it's difficult to use. Difficult.
This is difficult enough.
That's right. The same concept, the wool is attached, there's a lead thread, and then the wool, it dangles, it spins. The difference between this and those ones is that when you put the wool onto it, it makes itself into a nice little ball, which you then just slide off, put to the side and start again. Whereas with this one, you end up having to use, that's a tiny one, that's a big one of these. Okay, prize for the night, what are they called? And not the weaving group, please, not the weaving group. For everybody else. Sorry? Skeins? They make skeins, yes. It's to make a skein on it. Then do you know what they're actually called? You right? This is one for your pub quiz. They're called niddy noddies. And truly, when you've got the wool off that, you put it onto that, and then you can make a skein out of it. Fairly simply. Niddy noddy. Amaze your friends. Astound your neighbours.
But these are very important because if I took that off there, it's just going to unravel. So you need to have it. Well, that's one I did earlier. The blue pizza style.
It would just sort of go boop and, yes, tie itself in knots because you've got that twist on it. And what you want to do once you've got past that is you want to do another one like, and then you want to twine them together, which makes them even stronger.
That's how you get your different plies?
Yes, that's the twine or ply. So you get 2 ply, 3 ply, 4 ply, and on upwards. There are technicalities to plying, which we're not doing tonight, because that's more than I can cope with tonight.
Yes.
S and Z twining. No, we're not going there. But if you want to learn more, Google's S and Z twining, and leave it up to yourselves.
So, when you have spun your wool, then what do you do with it? And now it's over to you.
Choice, isn't it?
I know.
You're doing well. At some point in the last million years, Homo sapiens decided that wearing the skins of other animals was perhaps not always a good idea, and that actually maybe we could do something with the hair of other animals to cover ourselves. Because as a mammal, we are ill-equipped. Was it the coming of an ice age? Who knows? It's all speculation. But at some point, we decided that we wanted to have something to cover ourselves. It is suggested that our early ancestors, watching perhaps birds build nests and weaving sticks together, kind of went, oh, that's an idea, let's have that. And began the idea of weaving. Of taking something that went one way, something went the other way, locking them together to produce an item. It's quite fascinating, I find, that the very clothes we wear link us right back to those early human ancestors. And whether you believe they came out of Africa or wherever else, it really doesn't matter. They came from somewhere. Weaving, at its simplest, I'll pass this round, is taking a piece of yarn, going one way, and moving other yarn in and out of it, going the other, to make something useful. How you do that, how you move those yarns about, what colours you use, that's where the idea of pattern comes in. I'm going to pass this round. This is a simple pin loom. And it's probably the sort of thing that you would have had in early modern times. Cranach people, they would have used something called a backstrap loom. Now, if you go into Google, my friend Google, you type in backstrap looms, you will see examples of these things still being used. Polynesia, parts of South America. At its simplest, it was a stick with lengths of yarn attached to it, another stick taking the other end of the lengths of yarn, and the tension was put on because the person weaving had tied that stick round their waist and leant back. Do you remember at the school when you'd be given 2 pencils and a long bit of wool and you had to twist it in opposite directions? Or was I at a very odd school? We did strange things. To make a cord to go through your, I don't know, whatever you were sewing, the bag for your shoes that never fitted your shoes or whatever. That sort of concept. Gandhi did it. He used the backstrap loom. He also used a version of a drop spindle. He found it very calming, I'm told. So, from simple pegs, backstrap looms, how do we end up with something like this, like these that I have here? After, please do come up and I'll talk you through in more depth. Depending on the kind of the warp and the kind of the weave, ooh, fancy words. The warp is the long thread that goes up and down. Think a wave. The weave is the one that goes across. Think waves. That's all it is, it's warp and weave. So you have this sort of thing. Pass that. Some of these are better finished than others. I use them for examples. You want to start with that one? Backstrap looms, that's it, backstrap looms. I'll pass that one. Yes.
Sorry.
Picture.
This bit.
Yes.
And your other bit.
Yes.
Right to back.
One is like, so all the warp's going in front of you.
Right, and your weft is going
Across the way.
With the stick.
Yes, the sticks.
Okay.
Simple, effective, portable. Nomadic people need something that's portable. So, how are you getting on there?
Done.
Oh, it's done. You're going to put on the knitting on you now?
Events.
Eventually. Think about that.
I'll try.
Okay. From peg looms, moved on to something more like this. It's actually a tapestry loom. This is part of the Maybole Regeneration tapestry weaving project. But we're using a tapestry loom for convenience and simplicity. Thread, yarn, through notches, in a frame, and away you go. This is basically what they use for things like, any tapestry you see in a big house now. The Bayeux tapestry, anything like that, would have started off with something like this. It's not a carpet, it's not a coat, it's somewhere in between. I'll leave these here, you can see them when you come round. Different fabrics require different fibres. That might seem a statement of the blindingly obvious, but the idea of mixing fibres is not new. And people would mix fibres for what they wanted. Now, prior to the discovery of organic chemistry and all the things we could do with oil that we never knew we needed to do with oil, you had a choice of sheep's wool, other ruminants, yaks, that sort of thing. You had camels. Camel hair was used. Camel hair is difficult because it slips. Any hair is difficult because it slips. When people say they want something spun from their dog's coat, it makes a shake, because it slips too much. No friction. What fleece has got, if you looked at it like that under a microscope, if you looked at this under a microscope, you would see on each hair that there were wee barbs. And that's what makes it stick together. Our hair doesn't have that. Neither does our animal's hair. They don't have those sort of barbs. So therefore, they won't work. You can spin them, but you must mix them with something like this, which is where you come back to Simon's carding hands, that you would mix them together. Personally, I'd want an electric carder. It's a lot less work. But that's a lot easier.
This is more traditional, though. That's
very traditional.
That's why I like doing it.
The power carder. Much as there was an industrialization process came that gave us these sort of spinning wheels, gradually an industrialization process came for weaving, because as you can see, it takes time. And time always was money. There was a time, Middle Ages, where a quarter of your annual income would go on clothes. Not because you were buying a lot of clothes, but because clothes cost so much. Think about that. Think about your own annual income, a quarter of it. And that might give you 2 outfits. Or it might be that one year you just bought yourself a cloak. That's how expensive it was. So obviously, if it could be done quicker, it would cost less. And that's where we begin to get into the idea of this sort of thing. Now, this poor soul has just come into our hands. It's a dryad. I think it's a W40. It's probably originally been in maybe a technical college, but it has arrived with us. It's a bit worse for wear, and there are bits missing, but the concept is sound. You've got your warp threads. You can see some of them here. They should go all the way there. This has been warped for tartan, so the threads are different colours. And instead of just moving a stick or a needle up and down to move your weft across, in this one, you could create a space between certain of your warp threads and shoot your shuttle through so much quicker. And that's where you get the weaving songs from. You get the beat of the weaving songs. Because the shuttle would go back, and forward. You know that rhyme? Half a pound of tuppenny rice, half a pound of treacle. That's the way the money goes. Back goes the weasel. That's a weaving song. And the pop was the sound that the shuttle made. It was such an incredibly integral part of everybody's life. Everybody knew about these things. So, something like this would sit on a table, and could be worked by hand, which is still slow and still a bit ponderous, because you've got to lift each of these up and down on a good day when it actually wants to behave itself. When we get our museum, this will be rectified a bit, and it will probably work a bit better. So that's the project. Anyone who wants to join us, please come and join the project. It's still slow. Let's speed it up a bit. Let's us put foot pedals on it so that your hands can go and your feet can go. A bit like somebody playing a pipe organ, if you think about it. Where they're pulling things out and they're moving things with their feet and they're doing this and they're doing that. That's what weavers looked like. And they sat on a bench. I can remember when I originally trained as a physio, and I can remember being told by one of the old lecturers that if you've got people in who were still weaving, they would usually come in because they had incredibly sore posteriors from sitting on the hard bench and moving about like this. Organists had the same problem. This I brought to let you see something of a more modern weaving. This is Donegal tweed. It's the width of it. We were very fortunate. We visited Donegal and we went into this wee shop, and there's this old man, and trust me, he was an old man, sitting at this enormous loom, and he's making these. Now, let me get myself right here. He wasn't moving his shuttles by hand. He moved them by pulling a stick. Because this is way beyond anybody's reach. And so he sat, moving things with his feet to lift the shafts, as they're called, pulling on strings to make the shuttles fly back and forward, chatting away to him till he came. But what he said was this. He said that when he had warped up his loom, when he'd put the warp threads on, it took a week to warp the loom. And when he had finished, he had enough length to make 6 of these. And he would. He would make one, leave a space, make one, another one, leave a space, and just keep going. Now that's at least 2 yards, 2 meters for all I know. And it would take him a week to make 6 of them. Hand weaver, working on his own. You begin to understand why they moved it into the factories. Because you're still talking about a lot of time and a lot of skill. And what Simon was talking about the weavers are now out of work. The death of weaving in this town and in the surrounding villages came about because the weaving went into factories. And at that point, to have factories, to have a weaving mill, you had to have running water. And we sit in this strange little town that doesn't have a river. Very rare to have a settlement without a river. We didn't have a river. Therefore, we couldn't have a water mill. Therefore, we couldn't have a weaving mill. Minishant had one. I'd love to see one of those Minishant blankets. Somebody was showing it around on Facebook the other week. But we didn't. They left. They left. They starved, or they left, or they retrained. Now, you can still get handmade things. They're not cheap. But what's good is my favourite things.
How much did the likes of that cost? Maybe a guy can make the sets of meat. How does that translate into this cost?
We were on holiday and we were daft. How much did we pay for it? It's about 200. From the maker.
It would have to be
Uh-huh.
to make colour.
To make the ends here, which is what's left of the warp, he sent it away to another place to twirl. If it's just twirled around, the machine, flick it on and twirl it around. Nowadays, weaving is seen very much to be, what I do is art weaving. It's a craft. It's something I do to make beautiful things. Yes, I could make enough to make a garment, but it would be a labour of love, not a labour of common sense. And whether I would want something made with a non-sheep wool, I don't know. This, if you want to pass it around, this is alpaca. It's very soft, but best mixed in with wool. So when you see things like mohair, that's mixed in with wool. But there are certain wools that work better. So this top I'm wearing just now is lamb's wool. These, that's merino. Softer, finer. Somebody asked me about knitting. You mentioned knitting.
Yes, I did.
Knitting doesn't come into this part of the world until about the 1300s, and it comes from India, China direction. One of the good things about knitting was there was no waste, is how I'll put it. It was made to fit. Garments made this way have to be cut. The material has to be cut. And that wasn't considered a good thing. It cost so much to make it. Why would you cut it? So when the coming of knitting, it meant that close fitting garments could be made that fitted. Here's a thought. If it wasn't so important about not cutting a piece of fabric, if you cast your mind back to your Bible study, they would not have said that at the crucifixion they took Jesus' garments and cast lots for it because it was made in one piece. It was worth its weight in gold. Weaving is part of our heritage, it's part of our history, it's part of her story, it's part of who we are. And I think really we should kind of know how it works, even if we don't do it ourselves. Thank you.
If you want to come to the next talk, which hopefully will be about the boot and shoe industry, keep an eye on our social media pages and the Maybole Regeneration social media pages for more information. But I think that's it. So feel free to come up and ask us questions if you want. And thank you very much for listening.